This is a little oil filter trick that I've been using for some time. Works pretty good. Um, when you get an oil filter, some of them are not like the K&N. First of all, oil changes are the most important part of owning a vehicle. Oil changes are the key to longevity and also making the car last as long as possible. Any engine or internal combustion engine that runs off either petrol or gasoline or any type, even electric, um, heat is the killer. So the death of all engines probably are going to originate to heat. So changing the oil and making sure that the parts are properly lubed so that the friction doesn't cause wear and tear on the parts and the friction doesn't kill the engine because it produces heat or overheats the part to a point of terminal failure. So, in an engine, the oil change is probably the most important part of owning it, other than paying it off. Okay, don't forget the financial. Stuff like insurance is also very important if you want to keep your license. Respecting the laws. Also, if you want to keep your license, if you don't want to go to jail or if you want to keep your license or have insurance, all those things are the responsible parts of owning a vehicle. But maintenance wise, oil changes are by far the most important. Now, it's not a matter of what kind of oil you use either. It's a matter of how how well you follow the maintenance schedule. Okay, the manufacturer puts in their maintenance schedule, and how well you follow it, or if you exceed the maintenance schedule, will determine how long your vehicle will last. And if you ask any mechanic and anybody who has a lot of old vehicles that have endured through the years and weathered, the environmental problems, they're going to tell you the same thing. The most important is your oil change. It's not your oil, it's your oil change and how regularly you do it. Nowadays you have synthetic, and nowadays the manufacturers, they spread out the maintenance to about 6,000 to 10,000. There are diesels out there that don't even need oil changes or don't need anything until they're about 100,000 miles. Same applies to spark plugs. So, the rules of the engine oil has not changed too much, but keep in mind that it is the most important part of your oil change. Excuse me, the most important part of owning a vehicle. Um, there's a lot of tools you can get out there to remove an oil filter, and season wise, probably the best way is to, in the summer, I would not recommend using a cheap oil filter. In the summer, when the heat really, especially if you're in tropical climates or the South, Texas, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, all those places have to deal with heat. And if you cheap out on your oil filters, you're going to find that you're going to have a lot of difficulty. Um, when you're dealing with extreme heat, also, synthetic is probably the way to go because synthetics have a tendency to hold the viscosity much longer than petroleum oil-based products. So, you know, uh, I like Mobile One because it's race proven. It's been in the 80s. It used to be $50, $50 for 4 quarts. Now you're probably going to be able to get Mobile One at half the price or less. It is a great oil. It's still used, and it's been raced, and it's been proven to be one of the most superior products out there. There's a lot of products for motorcycles also because it's a four-cylinder, high viscosity, high RPM engine. But today's video is on how to take off the oil filter and what is the proper torque. I like to keep sandpaper around after I use it. As you can see, this is pretty new. I make these little pads. Um, I put duct tape on them and I put it in my sander. I make my own pads and they work pretty good. when I'm sanding a lot. 3M is probably the best sandpaper you're going to get, and these things last a really long time. I could probably use this for a month. Whatever the case, I always save the old stuff, and some of these are pretty old. I've got another bag full of them. But when you the proper torque on there's no proper torque, and there's no torque wrench you can do with a oil filter. The manufacturer doesn't have any dial on here that once you snug it tight, they go 45 degrees also. But I think the test or the best way to do it without using the K&N oil filter, which is probably the K&N oil filters is probably going to be your best oil filter in the summer for a motorcycle. I've noticed a tremendous difference with that K&N oil filter compared to a standard filter or high performance filter. These are generic filters. They cost me about $2, and whenever I use these in the winter, I usually put one on when I change it, and a month before I change it, I put another one on there, and just to make sure the whole engine is cleaned out before I do the oil change. Again, they're only $2, so per oil change, I'm paying about $4. But if I'm doing some heavy traveling and miles, I'll probably just go with the K&N because it's such a good filter. There's nothing else that compares to the K&N filter, and they're pricey. They're 4 times the price of these things, 4 times the cost of a standard filter. But this video is not on the filter itself. It's on how to remove it and the proper torque. When you spin these things on and when they're brand new, you put an edge of oil on here and you spin it on. I like to take it, once it's snug on, I like to take it and go quarter turn. That's as far as I want to go. Some people will take it a little farther than that. Now, as it heats up, and if you remove it, like I do sometimes, because when I work on an engine, I will take this out, the seal is crushed. And when the seal is crushed, by the time you snug it and then do your 4th turn, you're going to have to do another quarter turn. So it gets to the point where it heats up and it pushes all the air out, and it's literally vacuum tight where you can't take it off. The best way to take it off is to get a sandpaper and just wrap it around it. This is 100 grit, but you can use wet sand if you want. If you have plastic gloves, this will grab it really tight, and you want to grab it with 2 hands like this. When you wrap that sandpaper with 2 hands and you turn it, it's coming off. Now, if you have to get a torque wrench or a breaker bar to get this off, like the K&N, then you probably have done something wrong, or again, the seal has crushed and you kept on reusing it like 3 or 4 times, like I do when I work on an engine. But if you changed your oil filter recently on your oil change and you're going to spin it off, it's a little tighter than what you put it on at, and you probably can't get it off. Go ahead and put your sandpaper on there and twist it off. It will grip and it will make it look ugly. You'll get scratches on there, but it gives you that tension that you want so you can spin it off, especially if there's oil all over it. Wipe it off and then put the sandpaper on there. The K&N has that little hex bolt right here, so you can put a breaker bar or a socket on there and spin it off, which is really fast, especially if you use an electric impact. You put your impact on here and just spin it off. It's done within about 2 seconds. These are my winter ones. So in the winter, it has a tendency to be a little bit thicker, and it has a tendency not to build up too much heat. So I just want to keep the fresh oil going, and I want to make sure that nothing restricts the flow because it's a little thicker oil. So, if you can't take it off with sandpaper, you can use the traditional method. That's to puncture. I mean, this has been around since the 70s, 70s and 80s. I used to do this with old cars and stuff, but you can take a screwdriver and just puncture it. A pick or something, puncture it. and then spin it off, hammer it, pound it out. If you resort to that, then you probably tightened it too much. But, you know, uh, the K&N filters are probably going to be the fastest, and you don't need any special tools. But if you get yourself in a pickle, let's say, you're stuck on the road and you can't get your oil filter off for some reason because you got to work on the engine, um, keep a piece of sandpaper around, and that way you can spin it off with your hand, or get the oil filter off and do whatever you have to do to the engine on a you'd rather on when you're stuck on the side of the road or stuck in the middle of nowhere in a night or when it's cold. It's a different story. It's different when it gets cold. It's different when it's at night. It's different when you're out in the woods. It's different when there's no human within a 100-mile radius of you. So it's something to keep in mind that anytime you have to get the oil filter off and you don't have an oil wrench or any tools with you, sandpaper or any coarse material will spin it off. And if not, get your knife out. Get your multi-tool knife or whatever tools you have, puncture it, and then you can pound it out. All right, the next video will be on the oil filters, and I'll go through the oil filters and how I organize the oil filters. Again, I like to use very cheap ones in the winter and during the summer when the heat is a real big problem and when it really counts. I like to buy the most expensive and the best filter that I can with a very good synthetic oil. So, Merry Christmas.